stressed out because I managed again to catch some kind of a cold. Well, it's not that bad. I think you can understand me. Anyway, today about the discussion. We've had the outline, we've had the results part. Now, when you have finally not only found your papers, but also gotten all the data out of your papers and written your results part, nicely structured and everything, now you have to write the discussion. And that is something which people, also the students I have here in Dresden, always have larger problems with because there's little structure. Yeah? Discussion is usually just one big piece of text. So they have problems starting. How do I start it? What do I put in it? In which way do I put it in there? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Basically, in the discussion, you tell your reader what the data tells you and, as a consequence, should tell your reader. So what we cover today, quite simply, just what about the discussion and some examples to go with it. So it should be quicker. What's the purpose of the discussion? Like I said, it tells your reader what your results mean. So basically, it's kind of like this. So it's sometimes called the two deadly questions regarding all types of research. Yeah. So you measured something. So you found something from all the papers and summarized it. Yeah. So now you've got your numbers in the end. So what? Somebody might ask you, so what? And second point, who cares? Especially if you have to write grant applications, that is definitely deadly. Basically, in the discussion, you try to answer these two questions in such a way that your reader is convinced of, as it says here, the merits and the importance of your results. So that's the basis behind that. How do we do it? Two questions. The first one, to answer the so what. So you've got all these numbers. So what does it mean? In the discussion, you have to explain the meaning of your results to the reader in a nicely understandable way. Not too complicated, because you want to take them along because you want to convince them in the end. To do that, you should do these things down here. You have to explain how your results answer your initial questions. Yes, I mean, you remember you started your research or your review with some initial questions. Now you have the results, and now you have to use them to answer the questions. That's the main point here. Do that in the discussion. Answer the questions using your results. If there are any links or correlations or anything that you can deduce from the data, from your analysis of the data that you did, also explain this here. And another important point, it says explain how the answers fit in with existing knowledge. That really means you measured something or you summarized something from other papers. What did other people measure? What do other reviews say? Do they come to the same conclusions as you do or not? And if there are discrepancies, who is going to be correct? Again, convince your reader. So that's the so what. What does this data mean? The who cares? That's usually a much shorter answer in the discussion. The so what takes the longest part. Who cares? In the discussion, you also should explain how your results translate into some kind of knowledge gain, benefit. Clinical benefit is very often for clinical approaches, how they help the scientific world or the medical world along in any way. Because otherwise, why do it? And to that end, you have these here. You use your results and the conclusions you drew from them, the way you answered your questions, and they should lead perhaps to recommendations regarding a treatment, perhaps to the development of some guidelines which you could start in there. Perhaps they might simply point the direction of future research. It's especially true of in vitro papers because the clinical aspect is usually a lot more limited in those. But they say, okay, we check this out, that looks promising, or we check this out, do not go in this direction any further, things like that. What does the scientific and clinical medical world gain from your paper? That is the who cares. Shouldn't be an enormous amount. in the discussion, but it should be there. So should the discussion should include, yeah, we said that, the meaning of your results. Why? How do they answer your initial questions? You should explain that to your reader in there. That's correlation with previous research. That's the literature context. You should, at this point, have read a lot of literature and know some more, and now put it into the context. What did others measure? What are their opinions? How does it compare to what you measured or found, and to your opinions? Critical assessment of the importance of your findings. We all think what we did and measured is important. You have to be realistic about that, yes? Not too humble, but be realistic about it. What do these results, what does this one little study actually tell everyone? Recommendations, already said that, should be somewhere in there from your results, or identifications of new areas of exploration. Another important point, this one, acknowledgement of limitations of your methods. No study is perfect. Even very, very good studies are not perfect. They all have limitations. You should acknowledge those before somebody else does it for you. What the discussion should not include: new results, only in a very, very, very limited way. If you put your own stuff into the literature context, then you might mention some. But usually, no. Description of methods, no. Off-topic areas, no. Diagrams, images, and figures, usually no. Usually it's all text. There can be some exceptions in there, but it's very rare. At least for the type of paper we usually write. In other areas, that's a little bit different. Now, comparison, discussion versus the results. We said that, yes, the results are facts. Measured facts. You just give them and present them and do some preliminary analysis, like the mean, the median, the distribution, things like that. Some comparisons. Hard data. Numbers, and you, if it's an experimental paper, you have statistics, tables, figures. If it's a review, you usually do without the statistics, but you probably also have tables and figures in there somewhere. Discussion. It's no more results, it's about what the results mean. That is why no new results should appear in the discussion. It's about what the results mean in answer to the questions, and it's about what these answers that you found mean in a larger context. That's, again, an answer to the who cares question, yes? How does everybody benefit from what you found? Discussion versus background. Background also should appear at a different place, namely in the introduction. We haven't had that yet. We'll do that in the next lecture because it's one of the least important parts of a thesis. Or it's also possible to do background chapters within the results, and they're at the very beginning where you just give detailed background. Both are possible. What you don't do is give background in the discussion. Usually, there are, again, some small exceptions to it, especially if you want to put things into context, but detailed background is not given in the discussion. And some people do that. They just take older papers and take the results or the information from them and put that in the discussion instead of into the results or introduction where it belongs. Shouldn't be done because it can result in a type of bias. You remember, there are many bias types are possible, and they will skew your data in a certain way, so it might not be as reliable as you would like it to be. And yeah, discussion is not about giving the background, but about showing how your findings fit into the background, what other people measured. So you have to mention it, but not in detail. Now, we are still stuck with having to write a discussion, and with one blank sheet of paper, and you have to start somewhere. So yes, of course, even though it is one big text, it does have a basic structure. Otherwise, it would be very hard to write and very hard to understand. Usually, you can very roughly divide it into 3 parts, mainly an introductory part. It's also called an opening or beginnings of it. That should contain this. Just 2 points. Restate your aim, summarize your most important findings. No more. Part 2, discuss those findings. That is the large part of the discussion. This one, part 1, is 1 or 2 paragraphs, and the conclusions are usually also only 1 paragraph, and all the rest is part 2. So that's also always the most difficult to write, to find the correct structure. So how do I try to organize my discussion? Like I said, it's often considered the most difficult section to write because it is comparatively free form. It's not as rigidly structured as the results, for instance, are. But speaking of structure, again, as with many things in this scientific writing aspect, some kind of logical structure is the key. And again, as for the whole thesis, it's best to have an idea of what you want to say first in your discussion, what second, what third, before you start writing it. So you just don't start writing and kind of get lost in the text of your discussion. In general, in the discussion, you go from specific to the general. You may remember for the results and everything else I told you, go from the general to the specific. First, give the large parts, the background information, then go to the specific data that you found. In the discussion, it's the other way around. Basically, you go from the specific to the general. The specific is what you measured, what you found. And you take this very specific set of data, and then you use it to answer your question. You put it into the larger context of the literature as a whole. You evaluate its importance. You try, if it's experimental, you generalize, meaning you measured something for a sample, and whenever we do that, we don't just want to know what happens in the sample, we always want to know what happens in the population as a whole, for which our sample is just representative. And that means from specific data, one subset, for one subgroup, we try to extrapolate. So we're going from specific to general. In this case, it's the other way around. And that's the way you do it. First, you summarize your findings, put them into context, talk about their importance, and then possibly about the applications to the general population. See, other way around. That's one thing to consider. That's what I already told you. Substructure before you start writing. It really helps. And what do you base your substructure on? Remember your research questions. At least that's what we always like to see when you write